The Maltese Falcon, 1941, is an all-time classic movie. But did you know that when it was proposed, a lot of people felt it was unlikely to succeed and unlikely to be any good? The stars the studios wanted all refused to be in it. The director gave a major role to an actor who had never been in a film before. And the poor guy was so scared on the set that he begged one of his co-stars to hold his hand to steady his nerves. Another actor had recently been involved in a high-profile sex scandal. And if that wasn't enough, the sexuality of one of the characters was in violation of the motion picture production code, which was definitely going to be a problem.
I am New York City, hard-boiled, grizzled indie filmmaker, Sean Weathers.
And I'm Canadian screenwriter and playwright Angus Combe. We'll talk about all these things and more, so stick around. You'll be amazed. This movie was based on a book by a guy named Dashiell Hammett. And Hammett actually used to work for the Pinkerton National Detective Agency. And he was actually a detective there for a few years. He started in 1915 and went till about 1922. But he kind of became disillusioned when the Pinkertons became involved in strike breaking. It didn't really sit well with him, so he quit. And he needed a way to make money. So he started writing short stories that were based on his experiences as a Pinkerton detective. And lo and behold, that was a success for him. He was first published in 1922 in a magazine called The Smart Set, and he became known for authenticity and realism in his writing. He wrote most of the detective fiction while he was living in San Francisco in the 20s. And so San Francisco really became a thing in his writing. He would refer to locations and he would mention various things. So that became a real thing. And he always said that he takes most of his characters from real life. And a lot of them were, I think, based on real cases. So he actually wound up writing for a magazine called Black Mask, which was sort of the leading sort of pulp detective magazine. And 4 of his 5 novels were actually first serialized in Black Mask before being published as books. And his novels were kind of, people thought they were the first that used dialogue that sounded really authentic to that era. And he's generally considered to be one of the very best mystery writers of all time. The New York Times called him the dean of the hard-boiled school of detective fiction. Time magazine included him and his 1929 novel Red Harvest on its list of 100 best English language novels published between 1923 and 2005. And the Crime Writers Association included 3 of his novels in their top 100 crime novels of all time. The Mystery Writers of America named The Maltese Falcon the number 2 on their top 100 mystery novels of all time. So the only one that was ahead of it was actually Sherlock Holmes. So that's quite something. So The Maltese Falcon is, of course, what we are here to talk about today.
One of the most famous MacGuffins in cinema history, the Maltese Falcon. That's a term,
Yes.
obviously, that wasn't brought up by John Huston, the director of this film, but from Alfred Hitchcock, an even more popular filmmaker that used this technique in even more of his films. But interesting enough, with the movie, the Falcon doesn't really play much of a factor till almost halfway through the running time. And even when it does come up, we don't see it till much further in the film, even after it's brought up. A lot of the focus of the movie is with the characters, how they act, how they interact, and their motivations, the greed, the avariceness of the characters, of human nature, and really just understanding them, developing them, seeing how they interact, what's true, what's not true. You know, there's a lot of lies, but where's the slither of truth that slides in there that can piece this puzzle together for our detective? Our detective, of course, being Humphrey Bogart, one of the greatest film actors of all time. I begrudgingly love Humphrey Bogart because I became a fan of his while I was watching James Cagney movies. And prior to this movie, Bogart was mainly a heavy in a lot of the Warner Brothers films, and he teamed up with Cagney in some of Cagney's better movies. And as much as I hate to say it, God, I hate to say it, he stole a lot of scenes from Cagney. And Cagney is just so energetic, such a ball of fire. My favorite actor of all time, my favorite filmmaker of all time, Stanley Kubrick, and my second favorite filmmaker of all time, Orson Welles, both highly praise James Cagney and think he's incredibly underrated. But I cannot deny it. In some of these movies, when they're sharing scenes together, Bogart just steals the show. So, obviously, when Bogart here has this opportunity to genuinely steal the show because it's his show to steal, he comes through in a big way, a really big way. After this movie, he was no longer the heavy. He was the lead character with Casablanca, who developed even more and become a romantic lead. Something even the studio didn't think, because when they advertised Casablanca, they advertised more of the action and mystery because they were playing off of the success of the Maltese Falcon. But he became a well-rounded, great actor. And when he did go back to becoming a heavy, The Treasure of the Sierra Madre, it was again an incredible film. That's one of my most favorite films of all time, maybe my favorite Cagney film of all time. And he also reteamed with John Huston, who he did this film with as well.
And of course, prior to this version of the Maltese Falcon, which of course is the definitive version that everybody knows, they actually made two other versions. They tried to adapt the book into movies. The first one being in 1931, and it was basically a pre-code movie, which means that the rules were not really being enforced and people were getting away with a lot of stuff. So it was a very sexy movie. They really kind of emphasized all the lurid stuff and the sexy stuff, and so it's actually not that inaccurate in a way, but it is kind of in its tone, and it really didn't work all that well, and wasn't a big success.
People call Humphrey Bogart a lot of things, but sexy was not one of them. So I could not see him pulling off that version.
No, no, and the funny thing is the code, that was 1931 when they made that movie, and the production code, as they called it, was, or the Hays Code, was actually enforced in 1934. And so after that happened, a lot of movies that were made before 1934 could not get permission to be re-released because they were too offensive, they were too sexy, they were too extreme. And the Maltese Falcon was one of them. They never had permission to release it again. And that's why they made the second version, which they called Satan Met a Lady, 1936. And this one is, I would say, by far the worst attempt. It's basically a comedy, and it stars one of your favorites, Bette Davis, and actually a guy who I like, Warren William, who he was a pre-code star who was in a lot of pre-code movies, but they're both kind of out of place in this, and it's just a weird movie because they change everything. Not only the name, they call it Satan Met a Lady, they change all the characters' names, they change everything, and it just makes me wonder, why do they even bother admitting that this is an adaptation of the Maltese Falcon? Because you would hardly know. There's just a few moments where you kind of go, oh yeah, that's from the Maltese Falcon. But they could have just changed those moments and then said, hey, this is a brand new movie. But so anyway, when it came time to do this version, of course, a lot of people were skeptical and thought, well, this didn't work the first two times. Why is it going to work now? You know, and
Third time's the charm, as they say.
yes, as it turned out, and of course the director who took the reins was John Huston, and this was the first film that he directed. You know, prior to that, he had been a writer, and he'd written a lot of things, but he was not a director. He had no experience, so a lot of people were mistrustful of that. And the budget was low, probably lower than the previous two movies, and you know, people just thought, why is this one going to work? But oh my God, it did, and yeah, it's a good thing that Houston pushed forward on it and really did it right. But
And they say
legend,
in Hollywood, relationships are everything. And it was very serendipitous that ended up working as a writer with Bogart as an actor in a couple of films before this. And they developed a really good relationship. with High Sierra and another Warner Brothers film prior to that in the early 30s. And they became somewhat friends, and Houston became a fan of Bogart on screen, and they would go on to make many great films together. A few bad ones, a few duds in there as well, and have a very tumultuous, long-lasting relationship where they would just get drunk and try to kill each other. And when they were sober, they would make some of the greatest movies ever made together.
Yes, absolutely. And legend has it that Houston, he felt that what was wrong with the first two movies is that they changed the book. You've got a great book. Why are you changing it? And there was a funny belief at that time that you had to change it. You had to make it more filmic. And he just said, that's nonsense. We're going to do the book. And legend has it, he gave the book to the script supervisor, I think, and he basically said, "Yeah, just convert this into screenplay format." And then he went away, and this person did, and then somehow it got accidentally sent to Jack L. Warner, and I don't think Houston had even seen it yet, and it was just the transcript. They hadn't really done anything with it. And to everyone's surprise, Warner loved it, and he basically said, "Yes, let's move ahead on this." And gave Houston a standard sort of B-level gangster picture budget and a generous 36-day shooting schedule, and he just said, "Yeah, let's do this thing. I love it." So,
One of those Hollywood lore stories. They all sound good, but how much truth is there really behind it? We'll never know because we weren't there, but it certainly sounds good. There are a few other stories in how this script got into the hands of the Warner Brothers. But that is certainly one of the more prevailing stories that came out. There were a couple of other versions as well. Howard Hawks telling him he should do the book, a few other different versions. But either way, this was definitely a smart choice to get off on the right foot. But you have to question, though, as much as this turned out to be great, when you're talking about the type of talent in front of and behind the camera that work together, maybe if it wasn't the Maltese Falcon, it could have been anything else. John Huston is one of the greatest filmmakers of all time. Humphrey Bogart may be the greatest actor of all time. And you have an incredible supporting cast, good producer, good cinematographer. Everyone wants to say the Maltese Falcon is really the backbone of this, but I think it's mainly the people behind it that were the backbone of it. And as good as the book is, as good as a lot that's going on and with the script is, uh, it's again, this is one of my favorite movies of all time, but I think something else, and they could have had it just equally a big of a hit as well.
yeah, it's possible. It's so hard to know. But one thing people sometimes say when it comes to working on a new play or something like that, you get a bunch of good actors together and you have them read the script, and if it's a bad script, really good actors can make it seem like it's a decent script, you know and if it's a decent script, they can make it seem like it's a great script. So I think it depends. If the source material had been terrible, then probably they couldn't have raised it up to this level of excellence. They probably just would have gotten somewhere in the mediocre range. But assuming it was at least a decent source material, this group of people probably could have turned it into something great.
Yeah, you talked a lot about the writer initially, and I don't want to take any credit away from just giving credit to the people behind the film itself. But as far as the actual book and the script goes, a lot of parallels, and it was very smart to lift a lot of the dialogue and try to make them as similar as possible, where the other films tried to make the movies as different as possible. I think Houston tried to parallel the book as much as he possibly could on the big screen. And I think one of the best parts of the movie, there are a lot of good parts, is as good as the dialogue is, the dialogue only supplements the acting. There's a lot of great lines, and as you said, it's kind of realistic. I don't know how people talk back then. 5 years is a lot in today's culture. In 5 years, you could know all the hippest lingo in the world. 5 years later, you use that lingo, you're an old head. You're like,
Mm-hmm.
hey, Grandpa, what are you talking about? Because lingo changes so quickly. Is that the way they talked in the late 30s and early 40s? Maybe. How the hell would I know? It definitely sounded more naturalistic than the prior detective films like The Thin Man and things like that. But leaving the dialogue aside, as good as it is, these actors kind of just say the dialogue. They say it well, and the dialogue is incredible, but it's how they perform the scene. Watching Humphrey Bogart grimace or walk away or say a certain line with frustration or say a certain line with glee in his eyes, it changes the whole tone of the dialogue. Even though he's saying the dialogue almost the exact same way, how he reacts, how he moves around on the screen kind of changes what he's saying. Or is he being sardonic here? Is he being genuine here? Is he being threatening here? The dialogue all sounds incredibly similar, but how he performs it definitely varies. And again, as much as I want to say it's the actors, which I do think it is, the dialogue just supplements them. The description in the book does match the description of what the actors are doing as well. So the book's action is also something that they take from that they also put on the big screen as well, not just the dialogue.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, what you're saying about the performance, I mean, this is one thing. If you watch the two earlier versions, you're going to see actors playing the same characters and they're going to say some of the same lines and they just don't work in those movies. Those actors don't deliver them the right way. They're leering, they're trying to be funny. I mean, they come off more like buffoons. They don't come off as a hard-boiled Sam Spade the way Humphrey Bogart does, and he just inhabits the role. Like he just is that character, and it just makes all the difference. You get the wrong actor in the part, and it's just not going to work.
Since we are talking about acting and you did mention Bogart, let's talk about his performance. He's a central lead in the character, and I mean, he's about as central as you can get. And with a lot of mysteries, you really want to emphasize your lead character, especially if it's a linear project and you're not going for thrills where a thriller, you may know what's going on, but then the characters don't, and anticipating it's like, no, don't do that, don't go there because you know there's danger behind that corner. In this, we're following Sam Spade, who doesn't know what's going on, so we don't know where the danger is. So he kind of guides us through the movie. As much as he seems like the smartest person in the room and he keeps his cool, he really doesn't know what's going on until the very end. And the end kind of plays out in a very long scene. Almost the whole third act of the movie is played out with all the actors together in one really long scene where everything kind of just explains itself. But he is, I think, in all but one scene in the entire movie, and that's where his partner gets killed. The one scene he cannot be in because if he's there, he kind of knows who killed his partner, which isn't revealed till the very end of the movie. So, out of necessity, the only scene he's not in is the only scene he cannot be in, which is the final reveal in the film. But his performance is incredible. And playing off of the characters he used to play, the heavy, the bad guy, the crook, the criminal, the guy with no redeeming value. Here, he kind of succeeds by playing off of that type of character. In this detective with a code, the archetype that's almost built in this movie that we see for decades to come, even to the present, you have this cool, calm, collected guy who blends in with the criminals, but he's not a criminal. I'd more so relate him to an undercover cop. An undercover cop, for them to really not get caught, for them to do their job properly, they have to make other criminals and con men believe they are a criminal and con man, but they can't lose who they are. They still have to be the good guy. They still have to do the right thing, but they have to be so believable as the bad guy to fool other criminals. And that's kind of the way I relate Bogart with his code, with this character that he develops that he plays in other films, and with this character that he kind of plays here. In that there is almost a shock when he has any redeeming value at all. And you kind of see that on the actor's faces, like, what you? No, no, no. Really, seriously. Let's split the money. And it's like, no, like he has some redeeming value. And it's not just that he has that. Going back to the actors elevating already great dialogue. The dialogue's already great, but Bogart really elevates this, especially in that last sequence of his last couple of monologues, where you see the pain in his eyes and you see the weariness and how much this takes out of him in that he's really fighting with himself to be the good guy. There is a struggle in there to do the right thing. Doing the right thing doesn't necessarily come easy for him. It comes with a cost. And that cost is he's losing a part of himself. I mean, I don't want to do I give a spoiler for a movie that's like older than your grandparents? But when he
Well,
gives that final speech, you can see how much it hurts him. It hurts him almost as much as it hurts the person he's betraying. And that pain in his eyes and in his voice is what really sells the character and sells the movie, for me at least.
yeah, and I wouldn't, I think people who are listening to this, I would hope, have probably seen the movie before, so I hope we're not spoiling anything for them. But yeah, he even talks about that in that scene about, don't let my shifty reputation fool you. I'm not, that helps me out in my job. It lets me get close to bad guys, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, he knows how to play all the sides and all the angles. And yeah, I think he is, in a way you could say he's almost sort of cool and callous, in that he seems like he doesn't care, like his partner has been killed, and there are so many moments in the movie which I love. I think they're great moments where he just kind of shows you that he doesn't care about it. Remove his name from the door. And when someone says to him, well, he must have had his good points, and Sam Spade says, I guess, or something. He doesn't have any love for his dead partner. It's all very cold and cynical, and I love those moments. But is that real, or is that part of the act? Does he want to seem like he doesn't care so that people will maybe trust him and let him in and tell him, oh yeah, I killed that guy? Or is that really the way he feels? It's kind of hard to say.
I think he's just a complex character. And that's what
Yeah,
makes Bogart and this character so great in that it's all true. He is
yeah,
pragmatic. He's a realist. He's maybe he's an atheist. Maybe he's a nihilist. Who knows? But he's not sentimental. I mean, listen, he's dead. It's my business now. It doesn't mean that I don't have a code. It doesn't mean that I'm not going to make things right. I don't have to be this 100% good guy or 100% bad guy. I can be my own man and I won't let circumstances dictate who I am. I'm going to stick to my code no matter what. And if my code makes you think that I'm an asshole, well, I don't give a shit, frankly. And if my code makes you think that I'm the greatest guy in the world, well, good. And then if my code makes you change your mind, well, fuck it. You deal with your own emotions. I'm sorry I broke your heart, but I'm not here for your feelings. And that's why I kind of like Bogart. Damn it. That's why I like Bogart almost, and I begrudgingly want to say it. Ah, a little bit more than Cagney. He's just so complex. Cagney, again, my heart is with Cagney as far as being my favorite actor, but he doesn't have that complexity. Cagney is just a ball of energy. Bogart is a complex ball of energy. He's like a Russian doll, where it's just like, well, you keep going and going and going, and there's more layers there, and the layers
yeah,
won't stop, like a Russian nesting doll, you know?
yeah. I think we once talked about those two actors, and I don't remember what movie it was, but I think I said something like, Cagney, he's going to punch someone or he's going to slap someone, and that's what's going to happen. But with Bogart, you kind of don't know what he's going to do. He just seems like this brooding, menacing figure, and he's kind of capable of anything. You're just not sure. which I do really like.
Yeah. I mean, he's one of the greatest of all time for a reason. And his portrayal of Sam Spade here, again, was an incredible archetype. And it was an incredible introduction to him as a lead character. And it was the start of something big.
Yes, and it's worth noting that he was already 40 by the time he made this movie. And I think most people had written him off as a guy who was never going to be a leading man. He was always going to be a heavy or a bit player. He wasn't going to be a star. And, John Huston, I think, really saw something in him, saw something more in him. And I think it came from writing those two movies and seeing him work and also getting to know him and becoming kind of buddies with him. But I think he saw something, and he was right. He was right that Bogart brings something to the leading man that some of the other people don't have. They're just two dimensional. They're not interesting. They're good looking, maybe, but they're just not complex. And Bogart just has so much more going on. He's a much more interesting leading man.
Absolutely. And there's a complex path to how Bogart landed this role. So Bogart at Warner Brothers, he was kind of on the lower end of their leading men. He was never the first choice for roles like this or for leading roles. You had James Cagney, who I mentioned before. You had Edward G. Robinson. You had who's that actor that turned down every part that made Bogart famous? He turned down virtually
George Raft.
George
George
Raft.
Raft.
George Raft, who turned down literally every great role that Bogart got. George Raft turned it down first. And there was also I think was it Paul Mooney that was at
Yes.
Warner Brothers? Paul Mooney.
Yes.
So
Yep.
I think it was either Paul Mooney or is it Garfield?
John
Which one of
Garfield.
is one of them that was at Warner Brothers' big star? It was either Mooney or Garfield. It might have been Mooney.
I,
Um,
I think so,
it
but
might have been Mooney, but you can look that up. But it was one of
yeah.
them. It might have been Mooney. Look it up and let me know if it was Garfield instead. But either way, Warner, like other companies, other production companies at that time, they had all their major stars under contracts. And when you're signed with the studio, you make movies with that studio in that time, in that studio era. And you had your A stars, your B and your C and your D stars. And the A star was the one that got to pass on every role. It's like every script went through them. And Warner Brothers had their A star, whether it was Mooney or Garfield, I'm not
Yeah,
sure.
it
You
was
can,
it was Mooney during the
it was Mooney.
19th during the 30s. He was considered their most prestigious actor at Warner Brothers. So
Okay.
he
Well,
was the big one.
Mooney was the guy that had the first run through of these type of parts that Bogart wanted. But he wanted to do certain types of films. He didn't want to do these type of films. And, you know, the people below him is like, well, hey, I want to do this film. I want to do that film. People are turning down roles. And Bogart said, well, get rid of Mooney, slot everyone else one stops, slot up, and your problem is solved. And that kind of happened naturally. And that's how Bogart got slotted up. Now, as far as Bogart getting this role, famously, it was turned down by, this is going to be a bit now. I'm going to forget his name on purpose to prove how stupid it was for him to turn down every role that Cagney got. Who's the guy that turned down this part again?
George Raft.
George Raft. So George Raft again turned down every role that made Bogart a star. So what Warner's wanted to do is they wanted Henry Fonda to do a movie for their studio, but Fonda was signed with another studio. Well, that other studio wanted George Raft. Well, how do we get George Raft to do a film with that other studio? Hey, we're going to offer George Raft this movie, which we know he doesn't want to do because he's not going to work with a first time director and he's not going to play this kind of shady bad guy. That's not the type of role George Raft takes. If it did, he'd have Bogart's career. So they offered him the role and said, you have to do it, knowing that he would turn them down. So when he turned them down, they'd be like, okay, fine, you can turn this down. We'll let you turn it down only if you do this movie with this other studio. So he agrees to do the movie for the other studio. They get Henry Fonda. George Houston think, oh man, this studio really backs me. But no, Warner Brothers, they're more deceptive than the Maltese Falcon in that they're playing chess while everyone else is playing checkers. They get Henry Fonda. They get George Raft to turn it down so George Houston could get Humphrey Bogart. Humphrey Bogart now gets elevated as a big star. They get Fonda for their big movie. And all's well that ends well with the backstabbing, conniving ways of Hollywood, which is more intriguing than a lot of their films. But yeah, it was an interesting path to how Bogart ended up getting this role and how Warner Brothers got what they got their cake and ate it too because they made their director, their star happy, and they got what they wanted at the end. And of course,
Hold on, god damn it. Oh shit. $2. God damn it.
George Raft.
George Raft ended up getting the shaft because he's George Raft.
Yeah. Well, interestingly, George Raft, one of the reasons he gave for turning it down is that he didn't think it was an important picture. And he actually wrote a letter to, I believe it was Jack Warner, saying, I'm writing to you personally because I feel any difference of opinion can be settled in a friendly manner. I strongly feel that the Maltese Falcon, which you want me to do, is not an important picture. And I must remind you, before I signed the new contract with you, you promised me that you would not require me to perform in anything but important pictures. So he was obsessed with being in something important, and he felt this wasn't. And of course, he was wrong about that. This was an important picture, as it turns out. But Huston actually always wanted Bogart, and he was quite thrilled when George Raft turned it down. And he later said that he was prepared to beat Raft senseless with a blackjack if he'd shown up on the set. So he really did not want Raft in this movie.
Yeah,
and I think,
but ironically, George Raft, of all those actors that played, so in the 40s, after post World War II, as these crime films and noir films became popular, that's the direction the studio went with their action movies. They went to film noir. But in the 30s, the decade prior, it was all gangster movies. And again, the gangster movies, you had Paul Mooney, the guy we talked about before, their A star that was in Scarface, great gangster movie. You had Edward G. Robinson in Little Caesar. You had James Cagney in Public Enemy. George Raft was also in Scarface, and he was in They Drive by Night. So you had all these actors doing these gangster type roles, but none of them had the complexity to eventually elevate and do the type of characters that Cagney did. But I think that was kind of their attitude. Is like they didn't want to keep playing these one-dimensional gangsters, but I don't think they really had the diversity or the range in their acting to really pull off these type of characters. And none of them really, I think their careers really didn't go that far after those very gangster movies that none of them wanted to do because they weren't the type of actors that you would typically see in a prestige type of film. And even James Cagney, again, my heart is with James Cagney. Um, he pulled away from gangster movies, but ironically, some of the better movies he made, I mean, he also did a lot of really great musicals as well, because he was originally a song and dance man. But aside from those musicals and the gangster movies, his biggest movies, even though he wanted to get away from the gangster movies in the 40s and 50s, were movies like was it Big Heat or Red Heat was the movie where he's
Heat.
top of the world, White Heat.
White Heat,
White Heat.
yes.
Yeah, his return to gangster movies, White Heat, was his biggest hit,
Yes.
post all those gangster movies. And it was a return to gangster movies. So as much as they ran from not wanting to do those type of movies, those were the type of movies that they were the most successful at.
So, in terms of the leading lady of this movie, the character Bridget O'Shaughnessy, there were a lot of actresses who were considered for the part, including Ingrid Bergman, Joan Bennett, Geraldine Fitzgerald, Paulette Goddard, Janet Gaynor, Olivia de Havilland, and Loretta Young. And the one that the studio really wanted was Geraldine Fitzgerald, and they offered her the part, but she turned it down. And for a few reasons, she just wasn't interested in doing a low budget movie, especially a whodunit with a novice director and what she described as a B movie leading man, i.e. Humphrey Bogart. And she had just played opposite Laurence Olivier in Wuthering Heights, and so she kind of felt like, yeah, I'm a bit above this material, this is kind of pulp fiction and I'm more serious. But the other thing is she also had a trip scheduled to the East Coast, and I think she had a special contract that she only had to work about 6 months of the year, and so the rest of the year she would do things like go to the East Coast, and so she didn't want to give that up and be in this movie. So again, probably a mistake because her career didn't really go all that well. But anyway, the second choice, of course, was Mary Astor. And the interesting thing about her is that she had been involved in a very high-profile sex scandal just a few years before. And it's interesting because she's always struck me as a very classy actress. She sort of looks very classy. She seems very classy. But she apparently had a lot of affairs. She famously, John Barrymore, I believe, and playwright George S. Kaufman, very successful Broadway playwright. And she had a diary where she would chronicle all of her adventures. And unfortunately, when her second husband was wanting to divorce her, he threatened her with this diary. He got hold of the diary and he said, I'll make this public. I'll ruin your career. You won't be able to act anymore. Because there was, of course, a morals clause in the brand new production code, the Hays Code, as they call it. So if she was found out to be, immoral, as they might say, then that could have really jeopardized her career. And so it got ugly, and the diary was never really released during the court proceedings, but her ex-husband's lawyer kept on referring to it and talking about things that were in it. And according to her, a lot of it was fabricated. So we don't really know what all is true and what isn't true, but it was huge news. It was in all the newspapers. It was a huge scandal. And I think it kind of, almost kind of derailed her career, but she somehow kind of made it through that. And then this part here, Bridget O'Shaughnessy, it seems like it's almost perfect in a way because she's playing a woman who is, I guess you could say, immoral in a way, and she seems to manipulate men and possibly have affairs with all these different men, although it's very, subtextual in this version of the story. But again, because of the Hays Code, they can't be very overt, but she's clearly, good at lying and manipulating people, and she's ultimately obviously the femme fatale, and perhaps the one that set the standard for all future femme fatales. So in a way, her reputation almost worked in favor of her playing this character, and it really kind of elevated it in a way, just because people knew kind of some of the stories about her, and it kind of all fit. But yeah, I think she does a great job. She's kind of all over the map in a way, because she's lying and she's saying all these conflicting things. And often when you look at her, she looks like she's kind of panicking, and she's trying to figure out what to do and what to say. And it's it almost seems a bit unhinged in a way at times. But yeah, I think I don't know, it's hard to imagine if someone else had done the part, much like if George Raft had played Sam Spade. I don't think it would be the same movie. I think these two actors in these parts, they just kind of inhabit them. What do you think about Mary Astor?
Well, I have a few thoughts. I'll start with this. Why so serious? Every actor. Well, this isn't serious enough for me. I only want to do serious films. Like, everybody is so hung up on the seriousness of the movies they do. Okay, like I can understand not wanting to make fluff or not wanting to make garbage, but a good script is a good script. A good part is a good part. Everything doesn't have to be Wuthering Heights or Gone with the Wind to be a good movie. It doesn't have to be this deep, thoughtful melodrama that everyone wanted to star in the 30s and 40s. You could make other good movies. A lot of those quote unquote serious movies are very dated melodramas that people don't even like nowadays. Most of the movies that are remembered from these eras are the genre stuff, the crime movies, the either the gangster movies or the film noirs or the artistic stuff like Citizen Kane and movies that were challenging. It's not a lot of these melodramas where you had all these long monologues where it's like everyone would just have like, their like two or three scenes where they would have their quote unquote Oscar scene where it would be their chance to talk uninterrupted, just spousing off these, soliloquies at each other. So I don't know. I just wanted to make a statement on that because everybody's like, I want to, I'm a serious actor. I refuse to do something. Come on, like, be serious. The other thing is, the only one I had read about that was really seriously considered was Geraldine Fitzgerald, but it's kind of interesting that so many names are out there from a superficial standpoint, because I guess we are guys, and any anyone who's seen any of my movies or even trailer for my movies know how superficial I am. From a superficial standpoint, the way the women in these eras were shot, the way they were flattened out, their makeup, the hair is always pinned down with these like bunches everywhere, and the dresses were very unflattering. It made it seem like no one back in the 30s or 40s had any shape. They were just these flat, like it's almost like a dress hanging from a hanger. It's just flat. Again, these women are beautiful. I'm sure they're whatever, but just the way they're photographed, the way they're dressed, the way they're portrayed, they all have like these 2 to 3 inch heels. They all have these similar hairstyles. They all always wear dresses, even if they're fresh out of bed. They have these dresses that go down to their ankles, and they're very unflattering. And they all have the same body type. They're all about like, 5'3" to 5'6", 110 to 125 pounds, maybe. They all look very similar. So when you say this actress, that actress, they all look the same to me. Unless you're talking about Marilyn Monroe. Physically, they all bring the same thing to the table. So it's just a matter of acting style and acting chops. And from an acting standpoint, I think she does a really good job. In today's day and age, the superficial male will say, hey, well, to be a femme fatale, you got to look the part. But again, back then, one actress is as good as another. So to me, it was all about the acting. No, she's not Igmar Bergman.
Ingrid.
Ingrid. Ingrid. She's not Igmar Bergman.
No,
God
she's
damn
certainly
it.
not. She's not. No.
She's not Ingrid Bergman. She's not the prestige actress that Bergman is. She maybe couldn't cut it in Gone with the Wind, in not Gone with the Wind, in Casablanca. But I think she's perfect for this. I think she's perfect for this because you have to be charming, which she is. You have to be fiery, which she is. You have to be unlikable, which she is. I mean, she's a complete bitch to everyone except Bogart. And you have to be likable when you need to be likable. She hits a lot of different ranges, where it's just like you can believe Bogart's in love with her. You can believe all these guys that actually know her thinks she's a piece of crap, because they actually know her. But yet you can believe that our lead character, the character we're rooting for, could fall for her. And all of those things are believable through her performance. And, when she needs to be flustered, when she needs to be shocked, Bogart's incredible monologues at the end of this movie don't work without her reactions. Her look of shock and surprise and just utter like disappointment in what Bogart tells her at the end of the movie doesn't work for Bogart if she's not playing off of him so perfectly well. She is incredible in this role. I'm never one to say anything is perfect. That's why I even said at the beginning of this that, hey, if they didn't do the Maltese Falcon, whatever John Huston would have picked, I'm sure would have been a successful movie if he had this cast, this producer, and this cinematographer, and etc. I'm sure it would have been a good movie. Yes, I think it would have been a good movie without Mary Astor, but Mary Astor really brings a lot to the table. She elevates this movie. She is maybe not as important as Bogart, but she's as important as Houston, but she's about as important as anyone else aside from those two in this movie's success. She's brilliant. She's the perfect archetype, the perfect first person to be the first femme fatale. She's amazing. Her performance was great. More superlatives, more praise. I can keep heaping, but I think my
Yes,
point is made. The
it
last thing
is.
I'll add before I let you continue is I heard this great quote from Mary Astor that I just think is brilliant. Makes me like her even more. Mary Astor once said, "There are 5 stages to an actor. Who's Mary Astor? Get me Mary Astor. Get me a Mary Astor type. Get me a young Mary Astor. Who's Mary Astor?" And it's so true. It is
Yes.
so true. Especially, it's for an actor, period, but it's mainly for an actress as well, because their
Yeah.
lifespan is so much shorter than an actor, like
Yeah.
a male actor, I should say.
Yes, yeah, and that's brilliant. That shows a lot of insight there, and unlike
And
Geraldine,
self-awareness as
oh
well.
yeah, oh yeah, and when Geraldine, unlike Geraldine Fitzgerald, when Mary Astor was offered this role and she read the script, she just thought this was ripe and juicy, and she thought the character was attractive, charming, appealingly feminine, and helpless, and a complete liar and a murderess. And what more could you want? She just thought this was a fabulous part, and she wanted to do it. And that's the right attitude. I don't know. I agree with you. I don't understand why people, if it's a good part, it's a good part, but yeah, Mary Astor, she ultimately wound up signing a contract with MGM, and she was not happy with it because they wound up putting her in a lot of uninteresting roles, and she wound
I'm
up,
sorry, before you move on to her later career and stuff like that,
yeah,
um, it's a lesson to learn from for other filmmakers and for actors as well.
yes,
Sometimes when you really want someone for a part and they give you the type of attitude that Fitzgerald does, they're doing you a favor by turning it down. Because if they don't see how much that role has to offer, A, or B, even if the role doesn't have a lot to offer, not every role is going to be this juicy. If they're not willing to bring their all to the part and they're just there to be a name, like how many movies do we see where it's just like, oh, here's this actor collecting a paycheck. Oh, this work is beneath him. As a filmmaker, that pisses me off to no end because every time someone looks at a bad movie, the filmmaker is always to blame. And when it's a good movie, oh, it's the actor's credit. When it's a bad movie and you have this big name actor and they're surrounded by other no name actors and it's a low budget and it sucks, no one ever says, why isn't that actor given any effort? It's more so, why would that actor give any effort? And that's such a shitty attitude to have. And I would say this to any filmmaker or writer or anyone watching this, you don't need that. Having a name actor that doesn't give a fuck about what dialogue you're giving them or anything you're doing on the script, reinvest that money into maybe the production or something else. Because as a filmmaker, it pisses me off to no end that an actor can just cash in, collect a paycheck, make fun of the movie they're in, get no blame for a movie's non-success if it's a low budget and if they're the biggest name in the movie. And it's better to get someone that embraces it, whether it's good or not. There are plenty of bad movies that are fun to watch because an actor completely embraces it and they have fun with the role. Yes, this is silly, but I'm going to be over the top like Nicolas Cage and I'm going to have fun with this and I'll make this a cult movie or a cult hit. Or it could be a movie that is great, but people just don't really see it at the time, like this, and Mary Astor can completely elevate it. So Didn't mean to interrupt you, but as a filmmaker, I just wanted to make that particular rant. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's great. That makes a lot of sense. Um, yeah, so I was just going to say, incidentally, that she wasn't really comfortable being the star. She didn't really want to be the sole star of a movie, Mary Astor. So she preferred being in movies like this, where there was somebody like Humphrey Bogart who could carry at least half the weight. She preferred that. So might be one reason why she didn't become a bigger name, but she did unfortunately sign a 7-year contract with MGM, which she came to regret because they gave her a bunch of what she called underwritten interchangeable supporting roles, and she dubbed it Mothers for Metro. That's what she wound up doing for 7 years, and nothing too interesting. But she also became good friends with one of your favorites, Betty Davis, because they did a movie together called The Great Lie, I believe. And Betty Davis had wanted her in the movie because she had seen her actually play the piano and perform, and she thought she was great. And they actually really got along, and they became good friends after that. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that the final film that Mary Astor did was one that Betty Davis did. Um, a great movie, actually. Movie I like. Um, is it Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte? Is that the one I'm thinking of? I think that
No, that wasn't
was
her. That was
was that or that which one
Joan
is it?
Crawford, wasn't it, in that one with her?
Uh
Oh no, 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 that wasn't Joan Crawford. Joan Crawford was in Whatever Happened to Baby Jane.
yes.
Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte. Mary Astor was in Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte?
Yes, she was. Yes.
Oh.
And that was her final role. Unlike a lot of people who maybe didn't get along with Betty Davis, they got along and they became
Which is
friends.
most people
Most people you're saying got along?
did not get
Oh,
along.
did not get along.
You
Okay,
said
yes.
unlike most people,
Yes.
which is most people who
Yes.
did not get
Yes.
along with Betty Davis. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Yes. Uh, yeah. So anyway, I kind of, I think what maybe you were getting at there a few minutes ago, that was something I used to think too. I would see this movie and I would look at Mary Astor and I would think, well, she doesn't really look like a real, manipulator of men, seducer of men. She just looks classy. She looks like a classy woman. But it's not so much the way she looks. It's her character, and I guess knowing her backstory, her actual real life story might have brought something else to it as well for
Yeah.
audiences at the time.
Yeah, back then it's really hard to, first of all, you can't look at someone on their on-screen persona and gauge who they are. That's why every time there's a sex scandal or anything weird going on with a celebrity, it's like, he did that or she did that. Because you don't really know these people. Someone can only play preachers in their movies and they could be a sex maniac. Who knows? Or someone can play a sex maniac and only go home to their wife and kids. So based on an on-screen performance or persona, you can't really gauge a person's character. And the other thing, again, with films back then, as I said, with the way they made women look, even the way they made men look, how many movies do you see from the 30s and 40s where every guy's in a suit? I mean, I doubt back then that every guy woke up and put on a three-piece suit to leave the house and a fedora. But if you look at these movies, you think every guy woke up in the 30s and 40s and put on a suit, you know? You don't really see guys in jeans and t-shirts in movies. So, everyone kind of had this similar look on the screen. So it's hard to say, oh, based on, this guy, he looks like a classy guy. He's always wearing a suit, you know? You don't really know. It's like,
Mhm.
these women, they're always wearing dresses and hats and their hair is all pinned up. You don't really know anything about the way they actually look or act or who they are off screen. And again, especially back then, because A, it's such a long time ago. Yeah, there's no way of knowing. And then B, everyone looks similar on screen.
Yeah, but on the other hand, if you see an actress like Jean Harlow or maybe even Mae West, you know right away, oh yeah, that's a man killer. You know, that's somebody who's seducing men, and she's a bad girl. You know, she's, you know, you kind of get it right away. Whereas with Mary Astor, she just seemed like she could be the girl next door to me. But I gather that a lot of people thought she was very beautiful, and I think she did enter beauty contests as a young woman, and
Who
that
was
was
the
kind of
who was the actress that's the lead in Gone with the Wind that was married
uh,
to Olivier? Laurence
Vivian Lee. Vivian Lee.
Vivian Lee.
Yeah,
Vivian Lee and Laurence Olivier. Do they seem classy to you? Sir Laurence Olivier, one
they
of the
do.
greatest actors of all time, the great
Yes,
Shakespearean, the guy
they
who does
do.
serious movies. They
Yes.
were supposedly sex fiends. Olivier was a bisexual guy into getting made love to by men while women watched. They were both incredibly like deviant sex addicts. They would have sex with different partners, they would have group sex, and they seemed classy. You can't
Yes.
really tell. You can't really tell.
No, you can't. You can't. And it's like, you know, a lot of true crime cases where it's like the guy's living next door or he's married to somebody and they have no idea that he's a serial killer. You know, he
Yeah.
seems like a nice guy, you know. So
Yeah.
that's very true that you can't really tell what somebody's really like.
And
But
even the two actresses that you brought up, a lot of that persona is one, it was really overdone on screen to the point where it's just comedy. And then two, it was part of their persona off the screen, you know? It's
yes.
like, well, Humphrey, like James Cagney's a tough guy. He's gonna take that persona off the screen, whether he is or not. Whether someone's gonna be scared of 5'2" James Cagney walking up to them or not, who knows? But Warner Brothers sold you that he's a tough guy and he's gonna whoop your ass. Even if he walks up to you and you gotta look down to see him. They sold him as a tough guy that's gonna whoop anyone's butt, you know?
Yeah.
So, I mean, Mae West, I guess she was sexy, but she just looked like a pudgy middle-aged woman saying
Yes.
weird lines that I don't know who would fall for. But they made you think that she was the thing, the sexiest woman on the world, and every guy wanted her, and she could get every man she wanted. Even when I think she was in like her 80s,
Oh,
and they
yes.
put Vaseline on the screen to soften her look. What movie
Yeah.
was that in when she was like a senior citizen?
Oh, well, there was a couple that she did later in life.
There was one particular one where I think she was like in
Yeah.
her 80s, and you couldn't
Yes.
even see the movie properly because they used an old technique back then where they would put Vaseline on the screen to soften up a woman's face and wrinkles and things like that. So you really couldn't see. And she was with men who could be like her grandsons, and they were trying to seduce her, and
Yeah.
it was cringy and awkward.
Sextet, I think, might be the one you're thinking of.
I wouldn't
Sextet.
know. I wouldn't know the name, but it
Timothy
was bad.
Dalton, a young Timothy Dalton, I think, is her husband or her fiance in that movie. He would
Hmm.
go on to be James Bond many years later, so he was
Hmm.
quite young at that point. But yeah, she kept up her act for her entire life. But part of what she brought to it was that they say she kidded sex. You know, she was somebody who was openly poking fun at sex, and that was kind of something no one had seen prior to that. And she had huge Broadway hits doing that. So, anyway, she was about 40 when she finally made it too. So, yeah,
I mean, sometimes it's just all a persona, and you
yeah,
play into it to, have that image, but it's whatever.
yes, yeah. And you're right. Confidence is a big part of it. People who are confident can really sell that.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. We should probably say a few words about Sidney Greenstreet, who plays Casper Gutman, or the Fat Man in this movie. And I always thought that,
Real
you know,
subtle. Called the
yeah,
Fat Man Gutman.
well, yes, and that's what I was going to say. That I always thought that that was just like, oh, we'll call him Gutman, but apparently in German that is a name and it means good man. So it's not meant to be commenting on his size. It's meant to be ironic that they're calling him a good man when he's actually really a very bad man. He's a criminal. So I found that very interesting. But Sidney Greenstreet, he was over 60 when he appeared in this movie, and this was actually the first movie that he ever appeared in. he was a theater actor. He had lots of experience in theater, and someone had recommended him, and John Huston thought he would be a great choice, but he was terrified, because he'd never been in front of a camera before. And apparently, when he was doing his first scene, he turned to Mary Astor and he basically said, "Please hold my hand. Please tell me I'm not going to make a fool of myself here," because he was just so worried that he wasn't going to make that transition from theater to film. And not everybody does, and not everybody can, but he really does. And I think his performance here is astounding. And he actually does go on to win, or not win, get nominated for an Academy Award for this performance. So he passed with flying colors, and I mean, he went on to do many other films, and yeah, it's very interesting. Not until he was over 60 did he become a bit of a film, maybe not a star, but a very successful character actor in Hollywood.
Yeah. And he's a prototypical final level bad guy in that you meet a few henchmen and a few other bad guys until you meet the main boss. And he's the one that has the long speeches and explains everything. And when he could kill the hero, he just knocks him out or wounds him, so the hero could come back in the third act and defeat him. So
Yes.
he does play into the prototype of the final boss type of character. And
Yes.
yeah, we see plenty of people play a Sidney Greenstreet in the future, where it's
Yes.
like, all right, here comes this large, heavy set presence. And ironically, what most people don't know that I'm actually going to reveal, I don't think you know this either. A young, because this came out the same year as his first film, his first feature film, Orson Welles came out with Citizen Kane this same year. When Orson Welles saw this movie, he was like, you know what? This Sidney Greenstreet guy, being this big, massive, fat villain type guy, over the next 20 or so years, I'm going to put on a bunch of weight and I'm going to end up playing a Sidney Greenstreet type character later on in my career. And it was actually inspired by this. And yeah, that's how we got things like what's that movie where Charlton Heston played the Mexican?
Touch of Evil.
That's how we got Touch of Evil and
Yeah.
that iconic villainous performance by Orson Welles. He saw this movie.
Wow. You're
Yeah.
right. I've never heard that story.
Yeah,
That's
this is an
yeah,
exclusive.
that's remarkable. But yeah, it's interesting. You brought up Citizen Kane the same year, and both this movie, The Maltese Falcon, and Citizen Kane, they were both nominated for Best Picture at the Academy Awards, but famously, neither of them won. It was How Green Was My Valley that won, which many people laugh about because it's not really remembered as well as these two are. It's a good movie, It's John Ford, I believe, made that movie. It's good, but it's just not. It's not the real classic the way these two are. So that's kind of interesting.
Yeah. I mean, they were never going to give it to Orson Welles anyway. Even when I saw some behind the scenes stuff talking about this movie, even the people behind this movie didn't give any credit to Citizen Kane. They were like, oh, yeah, we came up with all these cutting edge things. Like, people are going to say Citizen Kane was cutting edge, but no, we started to make our movie before Citizen Kane. We're the real cutting edge. It just kills me. It kills me how much people don't want to give any credit to Orson Welles or Citizen Kane. There's so much I don't know. I guess he really pissed them off, people in Hollywood at that time, or people in Hollywood in general. But the amount of people that don't want to give that movie credit is asinine. It's just crazy.
Yeah,
But yeah, I mean, honestly, I think even if this one, it would have been a criminal for Citizen Kane not to win. But the fact
yeah,
that even it wasn't even this film, it was How Green Was My Valley. I mean, come on.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, John Ford, one of the great filmmakers of all time, but
Oh
come on,
yeah, but
come
that's
on.
not his best movie though, by a long
No,
shot.
no,
Yeah,
no.
yeah. So yeah. So aside from Sidney Greenstreet, we also have Peter Lorre in this movie. And, Peter Lorre, of course,
Oh,
kind
yes.
of
Excellent.
yeah, yeah, yeah. One of the most imitated characters or actors probably in history.
Right behind Humphrey Bogart
Yes, yeah.
as far as
Um,
imitated actors.
yeah, absolutely. And of course, he was best known for playing the, I guess we call him the villain, maybe, and M, Fritz Lang's movie prior to this.
So he plays a pedophile that kills little children, and you said he's the villain, maybe.
Well,
Maybe he's the villain.
there
A
might be.
pedophile that kills children is maybe the villain.
Well, I wasn't sure if villain was the right word or whether it's a monster or, I just wasn't sure whether,
Here comes the back pedal. Here comes the back
and,
pedal.
and I thought
No, you said
perhaps
maybe. You
it's a
said
little
maybe.
nuanced, maybe, like, are we
Nuance.
sympathetic to him? Do we feel sorry for him?
Sympathetic to a pedophile
Uh,
that kills children.
yeah,
Okay.
well,
Okay.
Um, but but yeah, this movie, in a way, this is kind of what solidified him as a Hollywood star. This really kind of launched him, and he's great in this movie. And of course, the interesting thing about his character is that in the book, he is openly gay. And of course, when the producers sort of saw the first draft that was very, very, very close to the book, they sort of went, "Oh my God, no, you can't do that. The Hays Code, the Production Code Administration, they're not going to let us do that. Going to get us in trouble." So they had to kind of bury it, but they're still kind of giving us hints in the movie, though. Like,
I'm curious. I think he's gay,
yeah,
the way it's played. What, aside from just calling him gay, what do you think they did that need to be edited out? Because he still comes off gay to me. Like, what do you think was omitted from the film? He had a boyfriend or something? Like, what could they have cut out? I mean, it's a tight script, it's a tight cast. I
yeah.
doubt they're just going to add another character to be his boyfriend that they cut out the movie. I doubt they would just say, "Oh, by the way, I'm gay." Like, what did they cut out of the movie, you think?
Well, that's a good question. I think, he was openly gay, so I think he just, had just kind of admitted it. And I think
But what do you mean, like, admit? Like,
well, he just
it's
didn't.
like oh my God, like I jerk off in the bathroom. What else can I admit? I'm an alcoholic. Oh, I'm a gay. Like, is he being interrogated? Is he a criminal? Like, how do you admit to something like that? Like,
Well, haven't you met gay men, and they just kind of right away, you just know, like they're
they
just
admit that they're gay.
well, they don't say hello, I'm gay, but they're just very clear. They're very.
That's what I'm saying. Like, to me,
Yeah.
it's very clear that he's gay. So I'm curious as to what they would have cut out. Like,
Yeah, well, all I know for sure is that in the original, which is the pre-code movie, where
mhm.
they could get away with stuff a little more, when he's introduced, or when Effie, the secretary, tells Sam that, "Oh, there's someone here to see you," she describes this person in such a way that he thinks it's a woman, and she's going to
Mm.
come in and they're going to, maybe get together. But of course, it's a man who walks in. And so I think that was even clearer that, this man is basically like a woman. But
Okay.
he, Peter Lorre doesn't play it as effeminate. He doesn't give him any real typical gay qualities, I don't think.
I mean,
But
he's caressing his walking stick
yes, well,
like
that's
it's a
one of,
phallic symbol.
absolutely, yeah. And that's
His
definitely,
he has perfume on his card.
yes, those are definitely hints. Absolutely. And the other interesting thing is that there's some suggestion that actually Caspar Gutman was also supposed to be gay, and that Wilmer was kind of like his boy
His
toy.
boy toy, yeah.
Yeah,
Because he does massage Bogart's knee when they sit down together.
yeah,
And then when he exits in the final scene he's in, he just give a little twinkle with his fingers, like ta-ta. Yeah, he does definitely come off effeminate.
yeah. And he says that Wilmer is like a son to me, but that may not quite be the way he feels about Wilmer. That
Mhm.
might be the way we're kind of covering it up in this post Hays Code world.
Mhm. Mhm.
But yeah, that's something like in pre-code movies, you could be clearer about characters being gay. They were just part of the world. but after the code was enforced, they kind of disappeared. Although lots of people will refer to Peter Lorre in this movie, his character, as a gay coded character. That, you know, gay men in the audience would have gone, oh yes, he's gay. They would have gotten it, but it wasn't something.
But I said he's gay. Are you calling me a gay man in the audience?
No, but I think, you know, you're a modern man who is a little more aware of these things.
You're
But
saying
I
the
think-
audience in 1940 couldn't tell he was gay?
Yes, I think probably a lot of the mainstream audience wouldn't have thought of it.
That's
they just would have
interesting. I just assumed that it was obvious, but you think that they couldn't tell?
I think so. I think, you know, mainstream people who weren't in that world, I think it just wouldn't have occurred to them. You know, the same way that, you know, Jack Lemmon and Tony Curtis dressing up as women and going into a women's washroom, nobody batted an eye, even though they don't really look that much like women to modern eyes when you see them. But I think at the time, people wouldn't have even thought, like, why would a man put on a dress and put on lipstick? Like, it just wouldn't have occurred to them that this might be a man in a dress. I think people just weren't as in tune to that back then.
I don't know. I disagree. I think people always say, well, we're more sophisticated now. We can tell. I think people weren't idiots back then. I mean, it was a long time ago, but they weren't morons. I mean,
No.
even like a few years ago, how long ago was it that movie White Chicks
Oh,
or White
boy.
Girls came out with the Wayne brothers?
Yeah. Was that like 15 or
But that's the same
20
kind
years
of
ago?
premise of like
yeah.
guys dressing like women and people falling for it.
Yeah.
I mean, you think someone in their teens now would say, "Oh yeah, like we could tell now that the Wayne brothers were really men." But when that White Chicks movie came out, the people back then, 20 years ago, they couldn't tell that they were really men. They looked like women, you know. You think people in their teens would say that about White Chicks now?
I hope not. And it's 20 years old, by the way, White Chicks.
That's what I'm saying. Someone in their
2001.
teens,
Yeah.
you know, who wasn't even born when
Um,
it came out.
But would you call White Chicks a good movie?
We're not talking about quality of movie.
Did it fool anyone, or did people go, "This is just ridiculous"? They don't.
We're not
look
talking
like
about quality of movie. We're just talking about
I-
comedies, which
I don't know. I didn't hear about Sean and Marlon Wayans going into any public washrooms in real life and fooling the women into thinking they were real women. I did hear that about Jack Lemmon and Tony Curtis. I don't know. Did you hear about Sean and Marlon Wayans fooling people in real life?
no, but much like Hollywood, when you told your first story about the secretary typing up the script and one of the Warner Brothers saw it, it could just be a story made up to make the movie sell, you know, to make it more interesting, a little sizzle to the steak.
I suppose that's true.
I mean, come on. Have you seen Jack Lemmon and Tony Curtis in wigs?
Well, absolutely, yes. That's what I'm saying. To my modern eyes, they don't look like women at all. Like, they would not fool me. But perhaps in 1950 they would have. I don't know.
With their shoulders and with their broad shoulders and come on. They don't even look effeminate. They're not even like effeminate men. You know,
No.
it's not like Peter Lorre or something where at least the height and the frame maybe they're tall,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
broad shouldered. That stubble's gonna show. You know, the stubble may not show in black and white, but it'll show in real life. You know, even though the movies are black and white, people lived in color in the 30s and 40s, you know. So, a lot of
Yeah,
things
you
that
could be
are
right. Could be right.
easier to miss with the eye in black and white are a lot more obvious in color. So,
Now you make a good point.
mm.
But getting back to the Maltese Falcon, I guess basically what we're saying is this is an amazing cast, and this movie really launched a lot of them into great things. I mean, we've already talked about Bogart going on to an amazing career as leading man. Peter Lorre and Sidney Greenstreet wound up actually starring in 9 films together after this. People liked them so much together. And actually, there's a 10th film if you count This Is Our Life in 1942, they have uncredited extra parts. They're sitting at a table, I guess just as some inside joke or something. But so they were in 10 movies together. And of course, there was a lot of crossover between all of those guys. You know, Bogart was in a few movies with them, and John Huston made more movies with them, and so it was like this beginning of this very interesting web of actors and directors, or a director, making movies over the next number of years. So this was definitely important for that reason too. That it really launched a lot of people.
This is a great film, great cast, and I think we should give our final review for the film.
I think it's a masterpiece. I basically think it's a perfect movie. I mean, I don't have any problem with really any part of it. I think from the writing, which I think is incredible, to the performances, which I think are also incredible, and I think John Huston really proves that he is an important filmmaker who is just launching onto the scene. And I think everything about this film to me is perfect, and I can just watch it anytime. I don't know how many times I've seen it, but it's one of those rare movies that I can just watch, and I'll always enjoy it. So I can't recommend it highly enough.
I would disagree in calling it a perfect film when I've seen better Bogart movies. I've seen better John Huston movies. And there are elements of the film that they're not really that high on the scale of what you look for in movies. Locations, cinematography. There are things that I would say it's hard for me to call it perfect when certain elements aren't really that high. It is a very low budget film. It looks and feels low budget. It almost feels like a stage play in certain ways because there are a lot of long scenes. There are even like scenes that are cut into scenes, like short little cutaway scenes, just to break up the location. Whereas a scene could go 20 minutes in one location, they'll just cut in like a really short, quick scene just to just to break that one long scene up. And even the whole third act is just one room. So I can't call it perfect because of things like that, but it is one of the best films I've ever seen. It is one of the greatest detective films. It is one of the greatest film noirs. It is one of the greatest John Huston films. It is one of the greatest Humphrey Bogart films. It is one of the greatest mystery films. So when you look at all these categories, while it's not number one in any of these categories, it's top 10 in a lot of categories. And it is easily one of the greatest films I've ever watched. It's incredibly rewatchable because for me, one of the most rewatchable films is a good mystery, because a good mystery is going to be complex enough that you know where it's going, but the details always confuse you if you haven't seen it in a while. You're like, yeah, I know the basics of what's happening. I know where it's going to end up, but how do all these details fill in the blanks again? For movies like this and Laura, it to me those are like incredible mysteries because again, the end result, you know where it's going, Mulholland Drive, you know where it's ending up, but it's so complex and it's so well done, and the characters give it so much nuance, or it's just like, yeah, I'm 90% sure that's their motive. But there's always that 10% chance that, like, am I sure that that was their intention? You know? And that level of doubt, that level of complexity, to me is what make mystery movies incredibly rewatchable and why mystery movies are some of the most fun to rewatch. And this is definitely well up there with that as well. And then when you throw in the historical significance of launching film noirs, launching the careers of an important filmmaker and an important director. Um, I'm sorry, I said filmmaker and director, same thing. Filmmaker and actor.
Yes, yes.
So, yeah, for things like that, and even for character actors, like, yeah, the history of cinema may not, you know, Sidney Greenstreet may be a footnote of a footnote on the history of cinema, but he was he's still there. And this launched his career. And yeah, there's just a lot to like about the movie. Without getting into full spoilers for a movie that again was made, before your grandmother or your grandfather were even born. Some people watching this. If you don't know the exact details, or if you're, depending on how you're watching this, what type of format you're watching it in, you could be watching it in the format of a watch along. Um, it's just worth experiencing for yourself without me flat out saying how it fully plays out and how it ends, because it also has one of the greatest endings of all time. My favorite filmmaker of all time is Stanley Kubrick, and what makes Kubrick one of the best defining attributes of a Kubrick film is it always ends on a crescendo. It's like, yeah, this is the only way this movie could end. The only way 2001: A Space Odyssey could end with is with a fucking space baby, that turns into like, the evolution of man, like Superman born, and spoiler for that movie. But yeah, this movie ends with the perfect ending for this movie. There was another ending that was shot, and I'm glad they didn't use it because the the final frame of Mary Astor's character, the final dialogue of Bogart's character, is just so perfect. The added tacked on scene may work for the book or something like that, but I'm glad they decided to shelf the final scene. I'm glad the Warner Brothers decided that they didn't want to force this first time director into going with the original ending and to just go with his instincts, and they embraced the ending that he chose. Um, yeah, there's just so much that worked out well for this movie, you know, that it's I
Yeah,
can very high recommend.
yeah, yeah. And you raise a good point. Like some people say to me, "Oh, I know who the killer is in this movie, so it's boring." And I think to myself, no, I know who the killer is in this movie, and I've watched it a dozen or 2 dozen times. And I think one of the things that John Huston talked about is that he got a piece of advice from one of the producers, and that was treat every scene as if it's the most important scene in the movie. And I think that that's good advice. And he thought it was the best advice he'd ever gotten. And I think that's what makes these movies work, is that it's not all about the big ending, the big reveal. It's about everything along the way, all the interesting scenes, the interesting moments. Every scene is good, and you just want to watch all these scenes. And it doesn't matter if you know how it's going to end. It's still a great movie and it's still entertaining. And oddly enough, that was one of the few places where this movie departs from the book, is not including the final scene. And I agree with you. I think they did not need it, and that was a good choice. So, yeah,
I think this is something that we talked about, or at least I've brought up before, because I think everyone, not just you and I, everyone watches or experiences things through their own lens. And for me, I always watch a film from a filmmaker's perspective. Like before I decided I wanted to make films, I mainly watched a lot of TV shows, Twilight Zone, things like that, Simpsons. But when I became like when I decided I really wanted to make movies, and I really started examining films, I started examining it from a filmmaker's perspective. And I think a lot of times you watch it from a writer's perspective. I think that's why you call this perfect, and why All About Eve is your favorite movie, because both the weaknesses of these two incredibly great films are things that wouldn't bother someone coming from a writer's perspective. Lack of locations and things like that, the stage play feel of it, and your pass with the stage. Um, but one thing that I emphasize a lot is there are different styles of making movies that can make movies completely different, and there's no right or wrong way of doing something. Just like we talked about All About Eve, you know what, that particular filmmaker, what's his name again?
Mankiewicz.
Mankiewicz, he hated movement of the camera. You can't move the camera. Focus on the actors. And then you have when we did Solaris, Tarkovsky had a completely different view of making movies, but they both make great movies, but their movies are incredibly different. Um, and I think there's a similar thing to this in that you're saying where Houston took the advice of make every scene important. And I think that works when you shoot a movie in the way this movie is shot, where there's not a lot of locations and it's just about performing the scenes well. It's not about dealing with elements. You're in a studio, it's a controlled environment. You're not dealing with variables, you're dealing with absolutes. You're not going to be rained out. Weather is not going to affect your shoot. The sunlight is not going to affect, when you can shoot, when you can't shoot, when you have to stop shooting. Traffic, pedestrians. It's completely controlled environment. No variables. Stuntmen, anything like that. It's just all talking and dialogue, and it's just about getting the actors to get the timing right. So for a movie like this, or All About Eve, every scene can be the most important scene in a movie. But when you're a filmmaker like Kubrick or a filmmaker like Tarkovsky, which are both very different filmmakers, or even Orson Welles, again, three very different filmmakers, but they have other elements that can be variables to the way they make movies. So they can't afford to make every scene the important scene. And I think it was Howard Hawks that said, to make a great movie, make every scene has to be average to good, and you need about five great scenes. Just no bad scenes. Don't have bad scenes. Just make sure every scene is average to good and have five great scenes and you're good. And I think Kubrick's philosophy was more so your movie is going to be made or broken based on how you allocate your time. You have X amount of days to make this movie. You can't spend the same amount of time on every scene. You have to pick the scenes that are the most important to you and spend the most amount of time on those scenes. So everyone has their own philosophy. And like they say, there's a bunch of different ways to skin a cat. So I think with this style of movie, I think that definitely works for a Mankiewicz or a John Huston. But I think there are other ways to make movies as well, based on how you make them and what you're aiming to create. So yeah, I think this style of making movies definitely work for this movie in particular. Maybe for others, not so much, but for this movie in particular, I think that's the perfect approach to have for it.
Yeah, and I've heard that other advice too, and I think that's very good advice, especially on a budget, and limited time. It's like pick the scenes that you think are the most important and really put time into those, and then some of the other scenes aren't as important, so you don't have to spend as long on them. And I think that does make perfect sense.
Yeah, why spend a day of an exposition scene that's just trying to get information across? And then you're going to spend a full day on that and then a full day on the climax scene. Why
Yeah,
not just get that exposition scene done in a half a day or a quarter day so you can double up your time on the critical scene, you know?
yeah, yeah, for sure. And interestingly, John Huston apparently shot this film in order, in chronological order. It's a very rare thing to do, but it's almost like a play in that way, where they start with the first scene and then they do the second scene. And it's sort of helpful, I guess, to the actors because they always know, okay, this is what I've done and this is what I'm doing next. It's hard when you jump around and have to remember, okay, well, when does this scene take place? So it was an interesting choice that he made, and it might add to that feel a little bit. Um,
And
but
again, it's you can only do that approach with certain movies. If you
yeah,
had to go like Istanbul for this scene and France for this scene, it's like, all right, we're going to France, we're going to shoot this scene. Okay, we're done with that scene. We're not shooting any of the France scenes because the next scenes are in New York, and then we're going to come back to France, and then we're
yeah,
going to you can't, obviously
no, no,
when you're doing something like this where it's just one studio set to another studio set, you can do it chronologically. And it does help the actors, especially if it's a mysterious movie that gets them confused. But if you have like different locations, you can't be bouncing around back and forth
Yeah,
because you want to shoot it chronologically.
no, totally. And apparently they were ahead of schedule and they often had time to kill when they would hang out at the golf club or somewhere and people thought they were kind of crazy because they weren't using their time, but they were, they John Huston had everything under control and he planned it all out very meticulously and it went off pretty smoothly, I guess. So uh, that's kind of cool.
Yeah. I would
So,
say the biggest flaw of this movie, honestly, is that it wasn't serious enough.
mm,
Yeah, I mean, if it were just a little bit more serious, I mean, you could have had
maybe, oh yeah, you could have had George Raft in it.
you could have had a George Raft in it
Yes,
or Geraldine Fitzgerald,
that's right. That's right.
if it was just a little bit more serious.
Well, if it was a period piece where they were in costumes, French costumes from the 1600s or something, that would have been more serious, I think.
Yeah, yeah. A little bit more Vaseline on the
Yeah.
screen.
Yes.
Any trivia to wrap us up or no?
Yeah, well, I do have some trivia, and I mean, I could almost turn this into trivia as well. Humphrey Bogart and John Huston, they wound up collaborating a number of times over the years. Do you know how many times they did? And do you know what those films are?
Beat the Devil, which is the first movie I've seen with them together, and one of their worst movies.
The last,
Um,
yeah,
oh, it was the last one.
it was
Okay.
the last one, yeah.
I know it lost them both a lot of money because they financed it together or something like that.
Yeah,
Beat the Devil, The Treasure of the Sierra Madre.
yes,
Um, this one obviously makes three.
yes,
Jeez, I know Bogart made hundreds of movies. How
yes.
many would he have made with John Huston? Um, Houston didn't direct The African Queen, did he?
Yes, he did.
Oh, The African
Yes,
Queen.
yes,
Um, geez, I know it's more than four.
yes, it is. Yes, indeed.
Um, Houston. I think they did more movies that was written by oh, that famous writer. Um, I would say maybe nine,
Not quite nine.
six.
Six. I believe it's a
Okay.
total of
What
six.
are the two I'm missing?
Across the Pacific, 1942.
Oh, I didn't know he directed that one. Okay.
Yeah, and Key Largo, 1948.
Oh, why did I think Key Largo was a Howard Hawks film?
I don't
Okay. Six. Well, I got four out of the six. It's not terrible.
know. No, no, that was pretty good. Uh, so here's a question. Do you know how many days it took to shoot the final scene between Bogart and Mary Astor, this final
Three.
client? Yes, that's correct. 3 days. 3 days.
Three sounds about right.
Yeah.
As a filmmaker, I would give it 3 days because
Yeah.
it's a long scene. You figure one day to fully rehearse it, block it, map it out, get what you're doing. One day to really get the everything you want from the actors. And then you want to do a day where the actors are exhausted and they can't think. They just have to read the lines and they're not blocked from this is how I'm supposed to do it. You almost want to break them and then have them keep going. So for me as a filmmaker, I always three is always the right number for me.
Okay. It's good to know.
Yeah.
Humphrey Bogart actually had to supply something for this movie.
His clothes.
That's right, his own
Back
wardrobe.
then, yeah, back then, Hollywood was very cheap. Actors, I don't think it's for this movie. I think just in general,
Yeah.
a lot of actors supplied their own wardrobe and I think even their own makeup in the 30s and 40s.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, at Warner Brothers, it was definitely common. They were trying to save a bit of money, but they
Yeah.
did.
I think some famous actors, especially actresses, would pay for their own makeup people but I do know like they made them go out of pocket for a lot of stuff because they were contracted. It's like, hey, you're on a contract. You have this amount of money. You're responsible for your own hair and makeup or whatever, you know?
Yeah,
What do you think we're paying you for, type thing.
yeah. So early in the film, Sam Spade walks past a poster for a non-existent movie, which is called The Girl from Albany, which was kind of a joke aimed at Warner Brothers because they had actually wanted to rename this movie, The Maltese Falcon. They wanted to give it a different name because they felt, well, we already did The Maltese Falcon in 1931, so they wanted a different name. And The Girl from Albany was kind of a spoof of what they had wanted. Do you know the name that they had wanted to use for this movie?
Is it similar to the girl from Albany or no?
It is similar.
The girl from San Francisco?
Well, close, close. It's actually
The girl from Is it the girl from? Is am I
no.
wrong?
You got
Okay.
the gender wrong there.
Oh, the man from San Francisco?
Close, close, but it's actually the gent from Frisco.
What a fucking awful name.
Yeah, thank God they didn't go with that. The gent
Jesus
from
Christ.
Frisco.
What a terrible name.
Yeah, so thankfully they did not do that.
The gent from
Um,
Frisco. God.
Now, here's an interesting thing, which I didn't even realize, but there is a cameo in this movie.
Mm.
Um,
Oh,
Captain
I saw it. I
Jacoby.
saw it. It was Houston's father. What the hell is
Yes,
John Houston's father? Walter
Walter.
Houston?
Walter Houston, yes.
Yeah.
So
I'm a
I
big
didn't,
Walter Houston fan. I think he was in a movie. Was it? It was that movie with Gary Cooper. I think he was in a movie with that was really good.
yeah,
And I know he was in a movie, The Treasure of Sierra Madre. He was great in that. But I
yes.
do know he liked putting his father in his movies. I think there was a movie with Gary Cooper, a Western. I know Gary Cooper made this really good Western with an older actor, and the older actor stole the whole movie from him. I think it was Walter Houston that stole the movie from him.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, Walter Houston was pretty good. He didn't really play a ton of memorable characters when he was young, but definitely Travis Madre was incredible in that movie. And
Yes.
yeah, I did see his face when he fell down on the couch in that
Okay.
scene.
Yeah, I did not notice that, but that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. Now Elijah Cook Jr., who plays Wilmer, um, uh, he was supposed to be quite young. They claimed he's quite young in this movie.
They
He's
kept
just
calling him kid.
yeah, but he's actually not as young as he's reputed to be. Do you know how old he was when he made this film?
Oh, they called him kids. I'm assuming he was supposed to be in his early 20s, late
Yeah,
teens.
he was supposed to be 20, apparently, roughly 20. Yeah.
Mm. Um, Geez, could he be in his 30s? Could he be 30?
He was over 30, in fact.
Really? He looks pretty
Yeah.
good for 32,
Higher,
34.
higher.
No way.
Yeah,
36?
higher.
There's no way he was older than 36?
He was.
38?
He was 38, if you can believe it.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm shocked because he does look really young.
He does.
And you see him in a lot of movies over the years, and he looks really young here. Like this is one of his first, but 38 years old?
Okay. Well, that was interesting trivia. This is the best I think I've done in trivia.
Yeah, not
No?
bad at all. Not bad.
Yeah. 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 Okay. Well, that was an awesome movie. Thank you
It was.
guys for spending that time with us. And until we meet again.